Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. A 9-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court has said that its objective is not to review the Sabarimala women entry case, but to examine the larger issues of law that are arising out of religious practices that are in conflict with the constitution. See, the Sabarimala case dealt with the constitutional validity of the ban on the entry of women in the menstruating age into the temple. In this case, the Supreme Court had delivered a landmark judgment in 2018 and it had allowed the entry of women by lifting the ban. According to the Supreme Court, the ban on the entry of women in the menstruating age on the grounds of their gender and their biological and physiological functions was a violation of their fundamental right under Article 14, which prohibits discrimination on the grounds of gender. And the Supreme Court also saw this practice as a violation of fundamental rights that are guaranteed under Article 25, which provides for freedom of religion and the freedom to profess, practice, and propagate one's religion. So, on these grounds, the Supreme Court had declared the ban on the entry of women at the Sabarimala temple as unconstitutional and it had lifted the ban. This historic judgment of the Supreme Court was later challenged by a group of petitioners who claimed that allowing women to enter the temple would violate their fundamental right under Article 26, which provides them the right to manage religious affairs. According to these petitioners, banning the entry of women in the menstruating age constitutes an essential religious practice which is inherent to their faith, and such essential religious practices are protected under Article 26, which provides us the right to manage our religious affairs. So these petitioners were basically seeking a review of the earlier judgment of the Supreme Court, and accordingly, the Supreme Court had set up a 5-judge constitution bench last year. In November 2019, this 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court, which was reviewing the Sabarimala judgment, observed that it needed an authoritative pronouncement by a larger bench of the Supreme Court in order to determine the essentiality of religious practices. During the same period, the Supreme Court was also dealing with other petitions involving religious practices of other religions which were in conflict with the Constitution. For example, the Supreme Court was dealing with the ban on the entry of Muslim women into dargahs and mosques. The Supreme Court was also looking into the practice of female genital mutilation, which is practiced amongst the Dawoodi Bohra community. It was also looking into the ban on the entry of Parsi women into the fire temple if they marry outside their community. So, since the Supreme Court was dealing with multiple issues involving the question of essential religious practices and their conflict with the Constitution, the 5-judge bench decided to refer the matter to a larger bench of the Supreme Court so that an authoritative pronouncement can be delivered. According to this referral, the Supreme Court has constituted a 9-judge constitution bench led by the Chief Justice of India, and this 9-judge bench has observed that its objective is not to review the Sabarimala judgment, but to examine the larger issues of law that are arising from essential religious practices which are in conflict with the Constitution. While referring this sensitive matter to a larger bench, the 5-judge constitution bench had framed 7 broad questions that had to be answered by the larger bench. The first question was, what should be the interplay between freedom of religion, guaranteed under Article 25 and Article 26, and right to equality that is guaranteed under Article 14? See, Article 25 provides us with freedom of conscience and the freedom to profess, practice, and propagate any religion. And Article 26 provides us the right to manage our religious affairs. It provides the fundamental right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes. It provides the right to manage the affairs in the matters of religion. It provides the right to own and acquire movable and immovable property, and as well as to administer any such property. This freedom of religion that is guaranteed under Article 26 and Article 25 could run into conflict with right to equality under Article 14 because few religious practices tend to be discriminatory in nature. Such discrimination is usually on the grounds of gender, caste, religion, etc. See, be it any religion, be it Hinduism, be it Christianity, be it Islam, etc. There are a few religious practices in almost every religion which tends to be discriminatory and probably violative of Article 14. But on the other hand, if such a discriminatory religious practice is claimed to be an essential religious practice that is inherent to that particular faith, then the right to manage such religious affairs is protected under Article 26. So it is this conflict that needs to be resolved. So one of the key questions that the 9-judge Constitution bench needs to answer is the kind of interplay that should exist between freedom of religion under Article 25 and 26 and the right to equality under Article 14. The second question that was framed by the 5-judge Constitution bench refers to the meaning of the terms public order, morality and health under Article 25 Clause 1. See, Article 25 guarantees freedom of religion. But please remember, this is not an absolute right. It comes with a set of reasonable restrictions. And reasonable restrictions can be placed on freedom of religion on the grounds of public order, morality, and health. For example, the practice of female genital mutilation that is practiced amongst the Dawoodi Bohra community falls under such restrictions. Similarly, the practice of banning the entry of women into temples, mosques, and other places of religious worship raises questions of morality. So the task of the 9-judge Constitution bench is to interpret these three terms, that is public order, morality and health, provided under Article 25 Clause 1, and it should come out with an authoritative interpretation which will help in deciding the interplay between Article 25, Article 26 and Article 14. Then coming to the term morality, the Supreme Court needs to answer whether constitutional morality, that is the moral values found in the preamble, applies to the entire constitution in an overarching manner, or is it limited to religious beliefs and faith? This would be the third question that needs to be answered by the 9-judge Constitution bench. Then coming to the fourth question, the Supreme Court should answer to what extent can courts interfere in religious practices and religious beliefs. See, in the Shriur Mutt Judgement of 1954, the Supreme Court had ruled that the essentiality of religious practices should be decided in accordance with religious doctrines of each faith. This judgment had basically reduced the role of Supreme Courts in determining the essentiality of religious practices. According to the Shriur Mutt Judgement, which was delivered by a 7-judge bench, courts should not inquire into the question of essentiality of religious practices, and determining the essentiality of such religious practices should be left to the wisdom of religious texts. Basically, the Supreme Court had said that determining the essentiality of religious practices should be left to the religious doctrines of each faith, and this judgment had reduced the power of judicial review as far as the essentiality of religious practices are concerned. But Clause 2 of Article 25 allows the state to regulate the economic, financial and political aspects of religious practice. So in these areas, the power of judicial review is applicable. But the Shriur Mutt Judgement of 1954 restricted the power of judicial review as far as determining the essentiality of religious practices was concerned. But now, the Shriur Mutt Judgement is being questioned due to the Sabarimala case, and hence, a 9-judge Constitution bench has been set up in order to provide an authoritative pronouncement over the Shriur Mutt Judgement, which was delivered by a 7-judge bench. So now, the 9-judge bench needs to answer To what extent can courts play a role in determining the essentiality of a religious practice? The next question for the Supreme Court is to answer the meaning of the expression section of Hindus, which has been provided under Article 25, Clause 2, Subclause B. See, according to this provision of Article 25, the state can make any laws for providing social welfare and reform, or for throwing open Hindu religious institutions of a public character to all classes and sections of Hindus. Then in the second explanation, the Constitution states that the term Hindus does not refer to followers of Hinduism alone, but it also refers to followers of Sikhism, Jainism and Buddhism. So accordingly, the term Hindu religious institutions under subclause B, clause 2 of Article 25 covers the religious institutions of Sikhs, Jains and Buddhists as well. So there has always been a certain degree of confusion with this provision of Article 25, and the Supreme Court needs to provide an authoritative pronouncement in this regard. The other two questions that need to be answered by the Supreme Court are: should essential religious practices be provided with constitutional protection under Article 26? And should the Supreme Court entertain public interest litigations that are challenging religious practices if they are filed by a third person who is not a member of that particular religion? Now let us take up another article from page number 1, which provides us an update on the economic front. According to data published by the National Statistical Office, CPI-based retail inflation has shot up to 7.35% for December 2019. This extent of retail inflation is the highest that we have seen in the last 5.5 years. And this has increased fears amongst economic experts that India might be headed towards stagflation. See, stagflation refers to a dangerous economic condition wherein a country will simultaneously experience high inflation, high unemployment and low growth. Currently, India has been experiencing a period of slow growth, and over the last 4 to 5 years, unemployment rate has increased consistently. But the only silver lining for the Indian economy was that inflation by and large was well under control. But over the last few months, retail inflation has increased consistently, and it has even breached the prescribed target mainly because of food inflation. Food inflation has been primarily driven by the rising prices of vegetables, especially the severe shortage of onions has had a huge impact on food inflation and in turn on retail inflation. According to NSO data, apart from vegetables, food inflation has also been driven by the sudden increase in prices of pulses, meat, fish, etc. So the persistent increase in food prices, especially that of vegetables, has placed a lot of stress on India's retail inflation, and as a result, it stands at 7.35% for December 2019. But food inflation is volatile because it is driven by seasonal changes. So the government and the RBI are hoping that food inflation will come under control over the next few months, and this might help the RBI to continue pursuing its monetary policy objectives. But the concern about the retail inflation numbers is that it has breached the inflation target that had been prescribed by the government. See, the government has prescribed to the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI that inflation should be kept within 2% to 6%. But now that the inflation target has been breached significantly, it might force the RBI to adopt significant changes in its upcoming monetary policy, and this might even have an impact on the fiscal policy of the government, that is on the upcoming budget for 2020-2021. Now let us take up an article from page number 6, which refers to the Moghalmari excavation site in West Bengal. See, Moghalmari is considered as an important Buddhist monastic site dating back to the early medieval period. At this excavation site, A few clay inscriptions had been found earlier, and their epigraphical studies has shown that two Buddhist monasteries existed at the Moghalmari excavation site between the 6th century and the 12th century. So the epigraphical studies of these clay inscriptions has provided proof that two Buddhist monasteries known as Mughalai Kaviharika and Yagnapindi Kamaka Vihara existed at this excavation site. These findings confirm the observations of Chinese traveller Huan-Tsang, who is also referred to as Xuanzang. When Huan-Tsang travelled across India in the 7th century, he had observed that 10 Buddhist monasteries existed within the limits of Tamralipta, which is found in today's West Bengal. So the deciphering of these clay tablet inscriptions has helped us identify at least two Buddhist monasteries out of these 10 that Huan-Tsang had observed during his travel across India. And the study of such inscriptions and Buddhist texts has provided definitive proof that a system of hierarchy existed within Buddhist monasteries. According to experts, Buddhist monasteries were organized as Viharika, Vihara and Mahavihara. Now let's take up an article from page number 9 which evaluates the implementation of the Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act of 2013. See, amongst the various social evils that is seen in the Indian society, the practice of manual scavenging has to be the most abhorrent. Since many centuries, the practice of employing humans to clean human waste has served as the basis for caste-based discrimination against the Dalits. This inhuman practice continues to this day, and it not only results in the social exclusion of the manual scavengers, but it also results in the deaths of manual scavengers due to the hazards associated with their profession. When manual scavengers are forced to enter sewage pipes and septic tanks, they are exposed to a number of toxic gases, which has resulted in the death of a number of manual scavengers over the last 2 decades. So, in order to end the practice of manual scavenging and provide for the welfare of manual scavengers, the Parliament passed the Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act of 2013. This legislation has made it an offence to employ people as manual scavengers to clean insanitary latrines. According to this legislation, it is an offence to employ people to clean sewage pipes and septic tanks without giving them protective gear. It also makes the construction of insanitary latrines an offence, and failure to demolish the existing insanitary latrines within a specified time period is also treated as an offence. Apart from prohibiting the employment of manual scavengers and the construction of insanitary latrines, it also provides for the rehabilitation of manual scavengers. It tries to provide for their welfare. It also mandates a certain amount of compensation to be paid to the families of manual scavengers who would have died while carrying out the hazardous task of cleaning sewers and septic tanks. Apart from providing for rehabilitation, welfare and compensation, the Act also places a set of commitments on government institutions, especially local authorities such as municipal bodies, cantonment boards, railway authorities, etc., who were the primary employers of manual scavengers. And in order to monitor and review the implementation of this Act, a central monitoring committee has been set up, which is chaired by the Union Minister for Social Justice and Empowerment. This central monitoring committee includes the chairman of the National Commission for Scheduled Castes. It also includes the chairman of the National Commission for Safai Karmacharis, and it also includes representatives from state governments and related central ministries. This Central Monitoring Committee relies upon the data provided by the National Commission for Safai Karmacharis in order to review the implementation of the Act. See, the National Commission for Safai Karmacharis was set up in 1993 in order to provide for the welfare of manual scavengers. According to data collected by this commission, there have been around 926 deaths in India due to manual scavenging between 1993 and 2019. Such a huge death count in today's world is nothing but a national shame for the country, and it points to the poor implementation of the Act. The data collected by the National Commission for Safai Karmacharis has shown that out of these 926 victims, around 172 victims are yet to receive their compensation from the respective state governments. The Central Monitoring Committee has noted that Gujarat has around 48 cases where the victims are yet to be paid compensation. Next comes Maharashtra with 32 cases, and this data shows that a few state governments are lagging behind when it comes to implementing the provisions of the legislation. And amongst all the states, Tamil Nadu has registered the highest number of deaths amongst manual scavengers, and data has shown that UP alone accounts for nearly 29,000 manual scavengers out of the total 53,000 manual scavengers who are found in the country. So this data shows that these states in particular have a lot to do if they have to prohibit the employment of manual scavengers and provide for their rehabilitation. Now let us take up an article from page number 9 which refers to the regulation of drones in India. See, the ever-increasing usage of drones by civilians poses a grave threat to the country's national security and as well as for the civil aviation traffic. So, in order to regulate the usage of drones by civilians, the Ministry of Civil Aviation and the DGCA came out with a set of rules in 2018, and it became effective from the 1st of December 2018. According to these rules, notified by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, all drone owners in India have to register their drones on an online portal known as the Digital Sky Portal. Once registered, the drones will be issued a unique identification number, and those who are operating the drones, they need to obtain a license or a permit known as the Unmanned Aircraft Operator Permit. These operator permits are not needed for those drone operators who are working for defense and intelligence agencies, but it is mandatory for civilian drone operators to obtain the permit. And the 2018 rules exempts nano drones that fly under 50 feet because they are mainly used as recreational toys and they do not pose any threat. Whereas all the other category of drones, they have to abide by the regulatory guidelines, and the drone operators need to ensure that they do not fly these drones in the no-fly zones. See, in sensitive areas around defense and strategic installations and around airports, no-fly zones have been established, and commercial drones cannot enter these no-fly zones. And any violation of these regulatory guidelines will be treated as a criminal offense, and it has been made punishable under the Indian Penal Code. So according to these 2018 rules, the Ministry of Civil Aviation has set 31st Jan 2020 as the final deadline for the voluntary registration of drones. And those who fail to do so would be penalized with a jail term and as well as with a fine. Now let's take up another article from page number 9. The Government of India has launched the Integrated Road Accident Database. This database will serve as a tool to analyze road accidents and devise safety standards and interventions accordingly. It is basically an online portal or an IT tool that has been developed by IIT Madras, and it has been implemented by the National Informatics Center with funding received from the World Bank. This project is being rolled out as a pilot project in 6 states, and under this initiative, police officers will be given handheld devices such as mobile phones and tablets through which they will record and collect data on road accidents, and they shall upload this data onto the database. Once a centralized database is created, the information would be used to analyze road accidents and accordingly devise safety measures. Once the pilot project is rolled out in these 6 states on a trial basis, it will be later rolled out across India. Now let us take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? The Bhils are an ethnic tribe found only in Odisha. This statement is incorrect because the Bhil tribe is primarily found in West India. They are found in Gujarat, Maharashtra, parts of Madhya Pradesh, and they are also found in few other states. But today Bhils have spread across large parts of India. They can be even found in Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, few parts of UP, Bihar and Jharkhand as well. In fact, in a number of states, the Bhils have been given the scheduled tribe tag as well. So they are not limited to Odisha alone. So this statement is incorrect. The second statement says, they rose up in rebellion against colonial rule during the 19th century due to agrarian hardships caused by colonial policies. This statement is correct. Between 1817 and 1847, the Bhils had rose up in rebellion against the colonial government primarily because of the impact of their policies on agriculture. So the correct answer is option B. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 5. This article refers to a controversial question on the Bhil tribe that had appeared in an examination conducted by the Madhya Pradesh Public Service Commission. Now let us take up the second practice question. The term HFHSD-IN 512, recently seen in news, refers to a new type of fuel developed by the Indian Navy in collaboration with Indian Oil Corporation with higher technical specifications. Amongst the four given options, the correct answer is option D. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 9. See, the term HFHSD stands for High Flash High Speed Diesel. This is a special variety of diesel that has been developed by the Indian Navy by working along with the Indian Oil Corporation. The quality of this fuel is better and it provides for better efficiency. So as a result, it reduces its carbon footprint. Now let us take up the third practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Raisina Dialogue is India's flagship diplomatic conference on geopolitics and geoeconomics being held since 2016. It is organized by the Ministry of Defense. The first statement is correct. See, Raisina Dialogue is organized by the Ministry of External Affairs in joint collaboration with a think tank known as the Observer Research Foundation or ORF. It has been organized since 2016 and it is modeled on the lines of Shangri-La Dialogue. Shangri-La Dialogue is Asia's premier diplomatic conference that is hosted by Singapore. On similar lines, India began a diplomatic conference that has been titled as Raisina Dialogue. So the second statement is incorrect and option A is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 12. Now let us take up an additional practice question. Clause 6 of the Assam Accord provides for constitutional, legislative and administrative safeguards to protect the interests of the indigenous people, and it provides for provisions to protect, preserve and promote the cultural, social, linguistic identity and heritage of the Assamese people. Statements 2 and 3 are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page 13. Now let us take up a map-based question. The Taal volcano, which recently erupted, is located in which country? The correct answer is option B. It is located in Philippines. Please look at this map. This is where the Taal volcano is located. It is located in Philippines and it is located to the south of Manila, which is the capital of Philippines. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 14 which refers to the recent eruption of Taal volcano that has resulted in the shutdown of Philippines capital Manila. Now let us take up a practice question from the 2015 prelims paper. Consider the following statements regarding the directive principles of state policy. The principles spell out the socio-economic democracy in the country. This statement is correct because DPSP provides a mandate to the government to provide for socio-economic welfare. It calls upon the state to reduce inequalities and to prevent concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. So the first statement is correct. The provisions of DPSP are not enforceable by any court. This statement is also correct. See, fundamental rights can be enforced by the court, but DPSP cannot be enforced. So option C is the right answer. Both statements 1 and 2 are correct. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, religious practices which violate the basic features of the Constitution have to be struck down. Critically evaluate. The second question, evaluate the implementation of Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act of 2013. So kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.